The champagne flute slipped from my fingers, shattering against the pristine marble floor of the Sunset Hills Country Club. Pink confetti from the gender reveal still clung to my cardigan as Jessica's voice echoed through the elegantly decorated garden room. Emma's sweet, but let's be honest, she's not really aunt material. She can barely take care of herself, let alone help with a baby. The room fell silent except for the soft jazz playing in the background. 30 pairs of eyes turned toward me, some pitying, others nodding in agreement. What they didn't know was that at that exact moment, 3,000 miles away, Educational Leadership magazine was preparing to announce me as their Innovator of the Year. What they couldn't see was the notification buzzing silently on my phone about the contract I'd just signed to expand Little Minds Academy to 12 new states. They had no idea that the woman they dismissed as barely functional was about to transform their perfect little gathering into something none of them would ever forget. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The desert heat shimmered off the pavement as I pulled my dented Honda Civic into the country club's circular driveway. Valettes in crisp white uniforms glanced at my car with barely concealed disdain before reluctantly taking my keys. I smoothed down my discount store dress and grabbed my worn canvas bag, the one that had seen me through countless shifts at Tiny Tots Daycare Center. To anyone watching, I looked exactly like what I'd trained them to see over the past 4 years. Emma Rodriguez, the struggling 28-year-old who worked with kids because she couldn't do anything else. The garden room was a vision of soft pastels and baby's breath, exactly the kind of Pinterest-perfect celebration Jessica had always dreamed of. She glowed in a flowing cream dress that probably cost more than what my family thought I made in a month. Her husband David stood beside her, one protective hand on her rounded belly, the other holding a crystal tumbler of something expensive. This was their moment, their triumph, and I was happy for them. Genuinely happy. But the way they looked at me when I walked in, with that mixture of obligation and pity, made my chest tighten. Jessica's voice carried that particular tone she used when she wanted to sound welcoming but was really just being polite. You made it. I wasn't sure if you'd be able to get the time off. She enveloped me in a careful hug, the kind that suggested she was afraid I might leave smudges on her perfect outfit. Behind her I caught David's eye roll, subtle but unmistakable. In their world, asking for time off from a daycare job was apparently noteworthy. Mom appeared at my elbow almost instantly, her smile tight with the kind of anxiety she always wore when she worried I might say or do something embarrassing. Emma, honey, you look nice. The pause before nice spoke volumes. Come, let me introduce you to some of Jessica's friends from work. She guided me toward a cluster of women in designer maternity wear and understated jewelry, their conversation pausing as we approached. This is my younger daughter, Emma, Mom said, her voice carrying that apologetic undertone I'd grown accustomed to over the years. She works with children. The way she said it made it sound like a hobby rather than a profession, something I did to pass time rather than a calling. The women smiled politely and made the appropriate noises about how wonderful it must be to work with kids, their eyes already sliding past me to find more interesting conversation partners. I excused myself and moved toward the gift table, where my modest wrapped present looked embarrassingly small next to the elaborate packages from boutique baby stores. As I set it down, I overheard Jessica talking to her college friends near the champagne fountain. Emma's always been the creative one in the family, she was saying, her voice carrying that particular inflection that turned creative into a polite synonym for unfocused. She never really found her direction after high school. Still figuring things out, you know. The sting of those words was familiar, a sensation I'd grown used to over family gatherings and holiday dinners. They saw me as the Rodriguez daughter, who never quite launched, the one who bounced between jobs and never seemed to build anything substantial. They remembered the girl who'd struggled through community college, who'd worked retail and food service before landing at the daycare. What they didn't remember, or perhaps had never really understood, was that everything had changed 6 years ago at Phoenix Children's Hospital. I'd been visiting a coworker's son who'd been admitted for tests, feeling overwhelmed by the clinical environment and the weight of seeing a child in distress. That's when I met Dr. Sarah Chen, a pediatric developmental specialist who was consulting on the case. She found me in the family lounge, quietly working with the boy, using simple games I'd improvised to keep him calm during his stay. I wasn't trying to be impressive or professional. I was just being myself, doing what felt natural. You have an unusual approach, Dr. Chen had said, watching as I helped the 5-year-old sort colored blocks, while telling him a story that made each color into a character with its own personality. Most adults try to distract children from medical procedures. You're actually engaging his cognitive processes while reducing his anxiety. Where did you learn to do that? When I admitted I'd just made it up, she sat down beside me with a look of genuine interest. Would you be willing to volunteer in our developmental therapy program? I think you might have a natural gift for this work. That conversation changed everything. Dr. Chen became my mentor, guiding me through certification programs and introducing me to research on early childhood development that fascinated me in ways nothing had before. I learned about neuroplasticity in young children, about how the right interventions at the right time could literally rewire developing brains. I discovered I had an intuitive understanding of how to reach children who struggled with traditional learning approaches, kids who'd been labeled as difficult.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
Or delayed, when they just needed someone to understand their unique way of processing the world. While my family saw me as someone who played with kids because I couldn't handle a real job, I was actually developing revolutionary techniques for early intervention with learning disabilities. I spent my evenings reading research papers and my weekends attending conferences, building a knowledge base that would eventually attract attention from educators across the country. But I kept all of this hidden, partly because I didn't want to deal with their skepticism if I failed, and partly because I was beginning to realize that their low expectations gave me a kind of freedom to experiment and grow without pressure. The daycare job became my laboratory. I tested new approaches with children who'd been written off by other programs, developing games and activities that helped kids with ADHD focus, that gave children with autism new ways to communicate, that turned dyslexic students into confident readers. The results were remarkable, but I documented everything quietly, building a portfolio of success stories that I shared with Dr. Chen and a growing network of professionals who were beginning to take notice of my work. 3 years into my journey, I made a decision that would have shocked my family if they'd known about it. I used my savings, modest as they were, to rent a small space in Tempe and open the first Little Minds Academy location. It wasn't much to look at from the outside, just a converted storefront with colorful murals I'd painted myself. But inside, I created something special, a learning environment designed specifically for children who needed more than traditional approaches could offer. The Academy combined play-based learning with targeted therapeutic interventions, using techniques I'd developed through years of observation and experimentation. We worked with children who'd been struggling in mainstream programs, offering individualized approaches that met each child exactly where they were. Word spread quickly among parents who'd been searching for alternatives, and within 6 months we had a waiting list. But I never told my family about any of this. At Sunday dinners and birthday celebrations, I continued to be Emma the daycare worker, letting them assume I was still in the same entry-level position I'd started with years earlier. When they asked about my work, I kept my answers vague, talking about helping kids without mentioning that I was now helping kids across 3 states through a network of academies that bore my name. The success of Little Minds Academy brought opportunities I'd never imagined. Educational consultants began reaching out, asking me to speak at conferences and contribute to research papers. Publishers wanted me to write articles about my methods. Universities invited me to guest lecture in their education programs. But I kept all of this separate from my family life, maintaining the fiction that I was still struggling to find my way. Now as I stood in the garden room, surrounded by baby shower decorations and the gentle hum of polite conversation, I felt the familiar weight of living this double life. My phone buzzed with a text from Maya Thompson, my best friend and business partner, reminding me about the Educational Leadership magazine interview scheduled for next week. The irony wasn't lost on me that while Jessica's friends were discussing their various career achievements, I was about to be featured on the cover of the most prestigious publication in my field. The gift opening ceremony began, and I watched as Jessica unwrapped elaborate presents, a $400 stroller system, a deluxe baby monitor with video capabilities, organic cotton everything in soft pastels. When she reached my gift, a simple wooden toy I'd carefully selected from one of our Academy suppliers, her smile became noticeably more strained. "Oh, how thoughtful," she said, holding up the educational puzzle that had been designed by leading child development experts. "It's very Emma." The comment drew polite laughter from the gathered guests, but it stung more than I wanted to admit. They saw the gift as evidence of my limited means and questionable taste, not recognizing that the seemingly simple toy represented cutting-edge research in cognitive development. The puzzle I'd chosen would help her future child develop spatial reasoning and problem-solving skills in ways that the flashier, more expensive gifts never could. But explaining that would have required revealing knowledge I wasn't supposed to have. As the afternoon wore on, the conversation naturally turned to parenting advice and future plans for the baby. Jessica's mother-in-law, a formidable woman named Margaret Miller, dominated the discussion with firm opinions about everything from feeding schedules to early education. The key, she announced from her position near the dessert table, is surrounding the child with the right influences from the very beginning. Quality child care, proper educational programs, exposure to cultured environments. Absolutely, agreed one of Jessica's work friends, a woman named Cynthia, who'd spent the entire shower name-dropping the exclusive preschool her 3-year-old attended. We had to get on the waiting list before Madison was even born. These top-tier programs fill up so quickly, and the difference they make is just incredible. I listened to their discussion with a mixture of amusement and frustration. They were talking about concepts I'd spent years studying and implementing, but their understanding was surface level at best, based on marketing materials and social media, rather than actual research. When someone mentioned the importance of STEM integration in early childhood, using the phrase like a buzzword they'd picked up from a parenting blog, I had to bite my tongue to keep from correcting their fundamental misunderstanding of how young children actually learn. Of course, not everyone can provide that level of educational foundation, Margaret continued, her gaze sliding in my direction with pointed meaning. But family support is still important, even if it's more basic. The word basic hung in the air like a judgment, and I felt the familiar heat of embarrassment rise in my cheeks. David must have noticed my discomfort because he chose that moment to join the conversation with his own contribution to the family dynamics. Well, Emma's great with kids, he said in the tone people use when they're trying to find something positive to say. She'll be able to help out with babysitting when we need a night out. His suggestion was meant to be kind, but it reduced my relationship with my future niece or nephew to that of a convenient child care option. Oh, I'm not sure about that, Jessica said quickly, her hand moving protectively to her belly. I mean, Emma's sweet, but this is going to be such a precious time. We'll want to be really careful about who we trust with the baby, especially in those crucial early months. Her words were carefully chosen, but the message was clear. I wasn't qualified to be trusted with something as important as her child's well-being. The conversation continued around me, but I felt increasingly like an observer rather than a participant. They discussed nanny services and family support systems, painting a picture of childcare that completely excluded me despite my actual expertise in the field. It was surreal to sit there listening to them worry about finding qualified people to help with child development when they were literally talking in front of someone who'd built a career around that exact specialization. As the shower moved into its final phase, with guests beginning to collect their favor bags and say their goodbyes, I found myself standing alone, near the window overlooking the country club's golf course. The desert landscape stretched out beyond the manicured greens, a reminder of the vast space between perception and reality. In a few hours, I would drive back to my modest apartment, maintaining the illusion of my small life. But tomorrow everything would change. The text from my assistant was waiting when I checked my phone. Magazine crew confirmed for 9 a.m. Mobile unit will arrive at location by noon. Are you ready for this? I typed back a simple yes, my finger, hovering over the send button for just a moment before pressing it. After 4 years of secret success, I was finally ready to let my family see who I'd really become. The baby shower was winding down, but the real celebration was just beginning. They thought they knew Emma Rodriguez, the struggling daycare worker who wasn't quite aunt material. Tomorrow they'd meet Dr. Emma Rodriguez, founder of Little Minds Academy, winner of the Educational Leadership Innovation Award, and the woman who'd been quietly revolutionizing early childhood development while they thought she was just playing with kids. As I gathered my purse and prepared to leave, Jessica caught my arm near the exit. Emma, thank you for coming today. I know it means a lot to have family here, even if, she trailed off, not quite finishing the thought, but we both knew what she meant. Even if I wasn't the kind of family member who could offer real support or guidance, even if my presence was more about obligation than value. I smiled and squeezed her hand gently. I wouldn't have missed it for the world, I said truthfully. And Jessica, I have a feeling this baby is going to be absolutely extraordinary. You have no idea what an amazing future is waiting for all of you. She looked puzzled by the certainty in my voice, but I didn't elaborate. Some surprises are worth waiting for, and some truths are best revealed when the timing is perfect. As I walked to my car, the Phoenix sun beginning to set behind the mountains, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. Tomorrow the carefully constructed walls between my two lives would finally come down, and my family would discover that the daughter they'd underestimated had been building something incredible right under their noses. The valet brought my Honda Civic around, and I slipped him a tip that probably exceeded what he expected from someone driving such a modest car. As I pulled out of the country club's circular drive, I caught sight of Margaret Miller in my rearview mirror, probably making some comment about my vehicle to the other departing guests. Let them think what they wanted to think, for now. In less than 24 hours, everything they believed about Emma Rodriguez would be turned completely upside down. The real celebration was about to begin. The morning after the baby shower, I sat in my studio apartment, nursing a cup of coffee, and staring at the stack of congratulatory emails that had accumulated overnight. The Arizona Republic wanted to do a feature story. The Phoenix Business Journal was requesting an interview about my expansion plans. 3 different venture capital firms had reached out about investment opportunities. But the most significant message came from Educational Leadership magazine, confirming that their camera crew would arrive at Little Minds Academy headquarters in exactly 6 hours to film the surprise announcement that would change everything. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica in the family group chat that included Mom, Dad, Michael, and Ashley. Thanks everyone for making yesterday so special. Already planning the nursery with all your beautiful gifts. Emma loved the wooden toy. It'll be perfect for when baby gets older. The message was sweet, but I could read between the lines. The wooden toy I'd given her wasn't just any ordinary puzzle. It was a prototype from our latest cognitive development line, designed by leading neuroscientists, and tested in our academies across 3 states. But to them it was just another simple gift from their simple sister. Dad's response came quickly. Can't wait to meet our grandchild. Jessica, make sure you register for those parenting classes at the hospital. Good to start preparing early. Then Mom chimed in, with a list of recommended books about pregnancy and child development, most of them outdated by at least a decade. I scrolled through their suggestions, with a mixture of affection and frustration, knowing that the research they were referencing had been superseded by studies I'd helped conduct and implement. Michael added his contribution to the thread. Ashley and I were talking. We should set up a babysitting schedule so you guys can still have date nights. Emma's always available on weekends, right? The assumption stung, even though I knew he meant well. To my family, my schedule was perpetually flexible, because they assumed I didn't have anything important happening in my life. They had no idea that my weekends were typically filled with conference calls with educators in different time zones, site visits to new academy locations, or strategy sessions with my executive team. Ashley's message followed. Emma, maybe you could help Jessica with some basic childcare tips. I know you see a lot of different parenting styles at the daycare. Even my sister-in-law, who I genuinely liked, saw my professional expertise as limited to casual observations from my entry-level job. She couldn't have known that I'd authored 3 peer-reviewed papers on early childhood development, or that my techniques were being implemented in programs from California to New York. I set my phone aside and walked to the window of my modest apartment, looking out at the sunrise painting the Phoenix mountains in shades of gold and pink. This place had served its purpose over the past 4 years, providing a believable backdrop for the life my family expected me to be living. The furnishings were simple, the space cramped, and everything about it suggested someone making the best of limited means. But today, after months of careful planning, I would finally reveal the truth about who I'd really become. The irony of my situation hit me as I prepared for what would be one of the most important days of my professional life. While my family was discussing my presumed availability for babysitting duties, I was about to be featured in the most prestigious education publication in the country. While they worried about my financial stability, I was reviewing quarterly reports, showing revenues that exceeded their combined annual salaries. While they questioned my competence with children, I was leading innovations that were transforming how we understand early childhood development. My laptop chimed with a video call from Dr. Sarah Chen, who was calling from her office at Phoenix Children's Hospital. Her face appeared on screen, with the warm smile that had encouraged me through every step of my journey over the past 6 years. Emma, are you ready for today? I know this has been a long time coming, but I think you're making the right choice finally going public with your work. I'm nervous, I admitted, settling into my desk chair with my coffee. My family has no idea what's about to happen. They still think I'm struggling to get by on a daycare worker's salary. Dr. Chen had been my closest confidant throughout this journey, the only person who truly understood both the scope of my professional achievements and the complexity of my family relationships. You know, she said thoughtfully, I've been thinking about that first day we met in the hospital family lounge. Do you remember what you told me when I asked why you were so good with that little boy? I nodded, remembering the conversation that had changed my life. You said you just listened to what he needed instead of trying to force him to fit into what adults expected. That's been your superpower all along, seeing potential where others see problems. We talked for another 20 minutes about the day's logistics. The Educational Leadership magazine crew would arrive at our Tempe headquarters at 9 a.m. to film the feature story that would announce my selection as Innovator of the Year. At noon, our mobile learning unit would arrive at Jessica's house with a special surprise, a presentation about the scholarship program I'd established in honor of her unborn child. By evening, my family would know that their struggling sister had been quietly building an educational empire, while they thought she was barely managing to support herself. After ending the call with Dr. Chen, I walked to my closet and selected the outfit I'd been saving for this moment. To maintain appearances over the years, I'd shopped primarily at discount stores and thrift shops when my family was around. But today I put on a designer blazer and tailored pants that reflected my actual status in the education world. The transformation was subtle but significant. I looked like the successful professional I'd worked so hard to become. The drive to Little Minds Academy headquarters took me through familiar neighborhoods, where I'd spent countless hours developing my understanding of early childhood development. I passed the community center, where I'd volunteered to run reading programs for struggling students, the park where I'd observed how children naturally learn through play, and the library where I'd spent countless evenings researching the latest findings in developmental psychology. Each location held memories of the journey that had brought me to this moment. Our headquarters building in Tempe looked modest from the outside, but that had been intentional. I'd learned from Dr. Chen that the most effective innovations often happen quietly, without fanfare or attention-seeking. Inside, however, the space was state-of-the-art, featuring specialized learning environments, designed according to the latest research in neuroscience and child development. We had sensory integration rooms for children with autism, adaptive technology centers for kids with learning disabilities, and creative spaces that encouraged the kind of exploratory learning that traditional education often suppressed. Maya Thompson was waiting for me in the lobby, her excitement barely contained despite her professional demeanor. As my business partner and closest friend, she'd been instrumental in building Little Minds Academy, from a single location to a network that now served thousands of children across multiple states. The magazine crew just arrived, she said, gesturing toward the conference room where I could see camera equipment being set up. They want to start with the overview interview, then film some of our programs in action. The Educational Leadership magazine team consisted of 3 people: a seasoned journalist named Patricia Hawkins, who specialized in educational innovation, a videographer named Marcus, who would capture footage for their digital platforms, and a production assistant named Kelly, who coordinated the technical aspects of the shoot. Patricia had done her research thoroughly, having read all of my published papers and spoken with educators who'd implemented our programs in their own schools. Dr. Rodriguez, Patricia began, using the title I'd earned through my doctoral work in educational psychology. Your approach to early childhood development has been described as revolutionary by your peers. What inspired you to challenge conventional methods? The question opened a floodgate of memories about frustrated children I'd worked with over the years. Kids who'd been labeled as problems when they simply needed different approaches to learning. For the next hour, I talked about the philosophy behind Little Minds Academy, explaining how we developed individualized programs that met children exactly where they were developmentally, rather than forcing them to conform to arbitrary standards. I described our success with children who'd been written off by traditional programs, sharing statistics that demonstrated dramatically improved outcomes in reading, mathematics, and social-emotional development. The videographer captured footage of our specialized classrooms, interviewing teachers who'd been trained in our methods and parents whose children had transformed under our care. One mother, Sandra Gutierrez, spoke tearfully about her son Diego, who'd struggled with severe ADHD, until our programs helped him discover his strengths and develop coping strategies that allowed him to thrive. Dr. Rodriguez didn't try to fix my son, she said. She helped us understand that he wasn't broken. He just needed different tools to succeed. What struck me most during the filming was how natural it felt to talk openly about my work for the first time in years. I'd grown so accustomed to downplaying my achievements and hiding my expertise that I'd almost forgotten the satisfaction of discussing complex educational theories with people who understood their significance. Patricia's questions were insightful and challenging, pushing me to articulate not just what we did, but why our approaches were so much more effective than traditional methods. During a break in filming, Maya pulled me aside to review the surprise we'd planned for my family. "The mobile unit is loaded and ready," she said, showing me photos on her tablet of the custom-designed vehicle that we used for community outreach programs. "We've got the scholarship announcement materials, documentation of all your achievements, and a presentation that explains the scope of Little Minds Academy, without being overwhelming." The mobile unit was
one of my proudest innovations, a fully equipped learning laboratory on wheels that we use to bring our programs directly to underserved communities. It contained adaptive technology, sensory learning tools, and assessment equipment that allowed us to provide comprehensive educational evaluations in any setting. Today it would serve a different purpose, revealing to my family that their struggling sister had been quietly revolutionizing how we understand child development. "I still can't believe you kept this secret for 4 years," Maya said, shaking her head in amazement. "Watching you deflect their assumptions at family gatherings, letting them think you were barely getting by, it must have been torture sometimes." She was right, of course. There had been moments when their condescension had been almost unbearable, when I'd wanted to prove them wrong just to see the shock on their faces. But I'd learned patience from working with children who needed time to develop at their own pace. Just as I wouldn't rush a 5-year-old who was still learning to read, I'd understood that my family needed time to see me as someone capable of significant achievements. Their low expectations had actually protected me during the vulnerable early years of building my business, giving me space to experiment and grow without the pressure of their scrutiny or advice. The afternoon portion of filming focused on our research and development work, areas where my expertise was most evident. Patricia was particularly interested in our longitudinal studies tracking the academic and social outcomes of children who'd participated in our programs. The data was remarkable. Kids who'd struggled in traditional settings were not only catching up to their peers but often exceeding expected benchmarks in critical thinking and creative problem solving. "Your critics might argue that your methods are too resource-intensive to scale effectively," Patricia noted, referencing debates that had emerged in academic circles about our approach. "How do you respond to concerns about the cost and complexity of individualized education?" It was a fair question, one that I'd wrestled with throughout my career as we worked to balance ideal outcomes with practical limitations. I explained our teacher training programs, which had enabled educators across the country to implement modified versions of our techniques in their existing classrooms. We'd also developed assessment tools that helped identify which children would benefit most from intensive interventions, allowing schools to use their resources more strategically. The goal wasn't to completely transform the education system overnight, but to provide better options for children who weren't thriving under current approaches. As the interview concluded, Patricia made a comment that stayed with me. "Dr. Rodriguez, what strikes me most about your story is how you've managed to achieve such significant success while maintaining genuine humility about your work. In a field that's often dominated by ego and self-promotion, your focus on outcomes rather than recognition is refreshing." Her observation made me realize that my family's dismissive attitude had actually shaped me in positive ways, teaching me to measure success by impact rather than accolades. The magazine crew packed up their equipment as Maya and I reviewed the final preparations for the family surprise. Our mobile unit would arrive at Jessica's house at exactly 2 p.m., when I knew the family would be gathered for their traditional Sunday lunch. I'd arranged for James Harrison, our media relations coordinator, to handle the initial presentation while I remained in the background, allowing my family to absorb the information before revealing my connection to everything they were seeing. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. James would introduce himself as a representative from Little Minds Academy, explaining that we'd established a scholarship fund in honor of Jessica's unborn child as part of our community outreach program. Only after they'd learned about the scope and impact of our work would he reveal that their own Emma was the founder and CEO of the organization they'd been learning about. As I drove toward my parents' house in Chandler, where the family gathered every Sunday for Mom's legendary pot roast and Dad's stories about his electrical work, I felt a mixture of anticipation and anxiety that reminded me of childhood moments before big revelations. The difference was that this time I wasn't confessing to breaking something or admitting to poor grades. This time I was finally ready to show them who I'd really become. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was about to surprise my family on the same day they dismissed me as not aunt material. By evening they would understand that not only was I qualified to help with their child's development, but I was actually one of the leading experts in the field. The woman they'd assumed couldn't handle adult responsibilities had been quietly building an organization that employed over 200 people and served thousands of families. My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Chen. Saw the magazine preview online. You looked absolutely radiant talking about your work. Your family is going to be so proud when they realize what you've accomplished. Her words gave me the confidence I needed for what was about to unfold. After years of hiding my achievements, I was finally ready to step into the light and let my family see the real Emma Rodriguez. The Sunday lunch table at my parents' house in Chandler was set with Mom's best china, the same floral pattern she'd used for special occasions since I was a child. The familiar aroma of pot roast filled the dining room as the family gathered around the mahogany table that had witnessed countless celebrations, arguments, and ordinary moments over the years. Jessica sat carefully in the cushioned chair Dad had brought from the living room, her hand resting protectively on her growing belly, while David hovered nearby with the attentiveness of a first-time father-to-be. Emma, you're quieter than usual, Mom observed as she passed the mashed potatoes. Everything okay at work? I hope they're not giving you trouble about taking time off for family events. Her concern was genuine, but it carried the underlying assumption that any workplace issues I might have would be related to my perceived lack of reliability or professional standing. She couldn't have imagined that my work troubles actually involved coordinating the expansion of educational programs across 12 states and managing a team of specialists who were revolutionizing early childhood development. Michael reached for the gravy boat and launched into a story about his latest insurance sale, a commercial policy that had taken months to negotiate. The client finally signed this week, he said with obvious pride. It's the biggest deal I've closed this year. Really validates all the relationship building I've been doing. Ashley nodded approvingly and Mom beamed at his success. I listened with genuine happiness for my brother's achievement, even as I mentally compared his excitement about a single large sale to the contract I'd signed just last week to establish Little Minds Academy programs in 43 schools across Texas. Dad carved the roast with the ceremonial precision he brought to all family meals, distributing portions according to each person's preferences accumulated over years of Sunday dinners. David, how are things going with the baby preparations? Getting expensive yet? He asked with the knowing chuckle of someone who'd raised 3 children. Wait until you see what diapers cost these days. And don't get me started on college tuition. Actually, we've been thinking a lot about educational planning, Jessica said, accepting her plate from Dad. I've been researching the best preschools in the area, and some of these waiting lists are incredible. Apparently we should have started applying before I was even pregnant. She laughed, but there was genuine anxiety in her voice about providing the best possible start for her child's academic future. The Montessori school near our house has an excellent reputation, Ashley offered, but their tuition is pretty steep. Still, investing in early education is supposed to pay dividends later, right? She looked around the table for confirmation, unaware that she was discussing concepts I'd spent years researching and implementing in ways that went far beyond traditional Montessori methods. David nodded enthusiastically. We've been reading about how crucial the first 5 years are for brain development. It's amazing how much learning happens before kids even get to kindergarten. His summary was accurate but simplified, touching on neuroscience principles that formed the foundation of every program I'd designed. The irony of sitting there listening to them discover ideas I'd been living and breathing for the past 6 years was almost overwhelming. Emma works with that age group every day, Mom said, turning to me with the kind of hopeful expression that suggested she was trying to find a way to make me feel included in the conversation. What do you see at the daycare? Any advice about what really makes a difference for children's development? Her question was well-intentioned, but it reduced my extensive expertise to casual observations from what she assumed was an entry-level childcare position. I chose my words carefully, knowing that anything too sophisticated would seem out of character for the Emma they thought they knew. Children are all so different, I said, which was true but barely scratched the surface of my understanding about individual learning styles and developmental variations. Some kids need more structure, others learn better through movement and play. The really important thing is paying attention to what each child responds to instead of expecting them all to learn the same way. Jessica nodded politely, but I could see that my response hadn't impressed her as particularly insightful. In her mind, I was stating the obvious rather than articulating a fundamental principle that most educational institutions still struggled to implement effectively. She had no way of knowing that the different approaches I'd mentioned casually were actually evidence-based interventions that had helped thousands of children overcome learning challenges that traditional programs couldn't address. Well, we're definitely planning to be very involved parents, David said, his tone suggesting that active parenting was a novel concept rather than a basic responsibility. I've already started reading to her belly every night. Studies show that babies can hear voices in the womb and start recognizing familiar sounds. His enthusiasm was touching, even if his understanding of prenatal development was elementary compared to the research I'd absorbed about early sensory processing and neural pathway formation. The conversation continued around the table, touching on topics that intersected with my professional expertise in ways my family couldn't possibly understand. They discussed sleep training methods that I'd seen implemented incorrectly in countless households, nutrition choices that affected cognitive development in ways they hadn't considered, and toy selection criteria that missed the most important factors for stimulating young minds. It was like listening to people describe a country you knew intimately based on postcards and travel brochures. Michael steered the discussion toward practical concerns about childcare and family support systems. "You guys are lucky to have so much family nearby," he said to Jessica and David. "Ashley and I are already talking about how we'll handle things when we have kids. Having Emma available for babysitting will be such a huge help." His comment was meant positively, but it reinforced the family narrative that positioned me as a convenient resource rather than someone with valuable expertise to offer. "Speaking of that," Dad said, setting down his fork and looking directly at me, "you might want to start thinking about getting some formal training if you're going to be watching the baby regularly. Maybe take a class in infant CPR or something. It's a big responsibility, and Jessica and David will want to feel confident about leaving their child with someone qualified." His suggestion was practical and caring, but it stung because it revealed how little he understood about my actual qualifications to work with children. The timing of his comment was particularly ironic, given that at that exact moment, the Little Minds Academy mobile unit was driving through Phoenix toward their neighborhood, equipped with documentation of achievements that would fundamentally change how they viewed my competence with children. In less than an hour, they would learn that the family member they were encouraging to take basic CPR classes was actually a recognized expert in child development with doctoral-level training and years of experience working with children who had complex needs. Ashley tried to soften Dad's words by adding her own perspective. "I'm sure Emma knows a lot about child development from working at the daycare," she said diplomatically. "But having professional certifications might make everyone feel more comfortable, especially with a newborn." Her attempt at diplomacy only emphasized how the entire family saw my professional experience as informal and potentially inadequate for real responsibility. Mom began clearing the dinner plates while Jessica and David discussed their timeline for setting up the nursery and completing their baby preparation checklist. Their conversation was filled with the excitement and anxiety that accompanies first-time parenthood, combined with the confidence that comes from financial stability and supportive family networks. They had every advantage that money and planning could provide, yet they were missing crucial insights about child development that could make an enormous difference in their parenting effectiveness. "We should probably start thinking about godparents soon," Jessica mused, her hand moving in gentle circles over her belly. "It's such an important decision, choosing people who can really be positive influences and role models." The comment hung in the air with obvious implications about who would and wouldn't be considered for such a significant honor. Given their assessment of my life circumstances and personal stability, I clearly wasn't being considered as someone capable of providing meaningful guidance to their child. David nodded in agreement. "We want people who are established in their careers, financially stable, good examples of responsible adulthood. People who can contribute to the baby's development in meaningful ways." His criteria for godparent selection painted a clear picture of how they viewed my qualifications or lack thereof for playing an important role in their child's life. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of Mom's phone ringing in the kitchen. She returned a moment later with a puzzled expression. That was someone from an educational organization calling about a presentation at our house today. They said they were from Little Minds Academy and wanted to congratulate Jessica on her pregnancy. Did you sign up for something, honey? Her question directed toward Jessica revealed the first hint of the surprise that was about to unfold. Jessica looked equally confused. I've never heard of Little Minds Academy. Are you sure they called the right number? She turned to David, who shrugged and pulled out his phone to search for information about the organization. Within moments, his expression changed from confusion to surprise as he scrolled through search results. This looks like a pretty impressive organization, he said, reading from his phone screen. They specialize in early childhood development and have programs all over the Southwest. Says here they've won multiple awards for educational innovation. He continued scrolling, his voice taking on an increasingly interested tone as he discovered more information about the organization that was about to arrive at their doorstep. Michael leaned over to look at David's phone screen. Wow, they work with kids who have learning disabilities and autism. These testimonials from parents are incredible. Listen to this: Little Minds Academy transformed our daughter's life. She went from struggling in kindergarten to reading at a third-grade level in just 6 months. His voice carried genuine amazement at the outcomes being described. Ashley joined the impromptu research session, using her own phone to explore the Little Minds Academy website. Their founder is someone named Dr. Emma Rodriguez, she announced, causing a moment of stunned silence around the table. Emma Rodriguez. That's interesting. Same name as our Emma. She looked up at me with curious eyes, clearly wondering about the coincidence but not yet making any serious connection. Probably just a coincidence, Dad said dismissively. Rodriguez is a pretty common name, and Emma's not exactly unusual either. His quick dismissal of any possible connection revealed how thoroughly he'd compartmentalized his expectations about my capabilities. The idea that I could be associated with an award-winning educational organization was so far outside his conception of who I was that he couldn't even entertain it as a remote possibility. Jessica was still reading about Little Minds Academy on her phone, her excitement growing as she learned more about their approach to child development. This is exactly the kind of innovative thinking we want for our baby, she said enthusiastically. Look at these statistics about improved learning outcomes. If they're really coming here to talk to us, this could be an amazing opportunity. Her enthusiasm about the organization I'd built was gratifying, even though she had no idea she was praising her own sister's work. The doorbell rang at exactly 2 o'clock, causing a flutter of nervous energy around the table as everyone prepared to meet the representatives from this impressive educational organization. Mom hurried to the front door, while the rest of us remained in the dining room, straightening our clothes and clearing the remaining dishes from the table. The moment I'd been planning for months was finally arriving, and I felt my heart rate accelerate with anticipation and anxiety. James Harrison's voice carried clearly from the entryway as Mom welcomed him and his assistant into the house. I'd worked with James for 2 years, and his professional demeanor and expertise in educational outreach made him the perfect person to handle this delicate presentation. He understood the family dynamics I'd described and knew exactly how to reveal information in a way that would maximize impact while allowing my relatives to maintain their dignity. Mrs. Rodriguez, thank you so much for allowing us to visit your home today, James said as Mom led him and his colleague into the dining room. I'm James Harrison from Little Minds Academy, and this is Kelly Martinez, our community outreach coordinator. We're here to share some very exciting news about your family. His warm smile and confident presence immediately put everyone at ease, though I could see the curiosity and slight confusion in my family members' expressions. Kelly began setting up a tablet and portable presentation screen while James explained the purpose of their visit. Little Minds Academy has a tradition of recognizing families who embody the values and potential we strive to support in our programs, he said, his words carefully chosen to build intrigue without revealing too much too quickly. Based on information we've gathered about your family's commitment to education and child development, we'd like to establish a scholarship fund in honor of your soon-to-be-born grandchild. The room fell silent as the implications of his words sank in. A scholarship fund in honor of Jessica's unborn baby, established by an organization none of them had heard of until 20 minutes earlier, seemed almost too good to be true. Jessica's hand moved protectively to her belly while David leaned forward with intense interest, clearly trying to understand how they'd been selected for such an honor. I'm sorry, Jessica said carefully, but I'm not sure how you knew about our family, or why you'd want to create a scholarship in our baby's name. We've never had any contact with your organization. Her polite confusion was understandable, given that the surprise I'd arranged was unlike anything they could have expected or prepared for. James smiled reassuringly. That's an excellent question, and the answer is part of what makes this story so special. But first, let me tell you a bit about Little Minds Academy and the work we do. He gestured to Kelly, who activated the presentation screen and began displaying images of our various academy locations, specialized learning environments, and children engaged in innovative educational activities. For the next 20 minutes, James delivered a comprehensive overview of Little Minds Academy that showcased every aspect of the organization I'd built over the past 4 years. He explained our individualized approach to early childhood development, shared statistics about improved learning outcomes for children with various challenges, and described our expansion across multiple states. The presentation was designed to demonstrate the scope and significance of our work before revealing my connection to everything they were seeing. Kelly supplemented James's presentation with video testimonials from parents whose children had thrived in our programs, academic research that supported our methods, and recognition we'd received from educational organizations across the country. By the time they finished the overview, my family had a comprehensive understanding of Little Minds Academy as a leading innovator in early childhood education, though they still had no idea why this impressive organization had appeared at their dining room table. "This is absolutely incredible," Jessica said, when the presentation concluded. "The work you're doing sounds revolutionary. But I still don't understand the connection to our family or why you'd want to honor our baby." Her confusion was evident, and I could see David nodding in agreement with her questions. James's smile broadened as he prepared to deliver the revelation that would change everything my family thought they knew about me. "The connection is actually quite personal," he said, his eyes meeting mine across the table. "The scholarship fund we're establishing in your baby's honor is being created by someone you know very well. Someone who has been part of Little Minds Academy since its founding. Someone who has dedicated her career to helping children reach their full potential." The room was completely silent as everyone processed his words, trying to understand what he was suggesting. I could see the wheels turning in their minds as they searched for possible connections between their family and this accomplished educational organization. The moment of truth had arrived, and I felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness about finally revealing the secret I'd kept for so long. Kelly activated a new slide on the presentation screen, and suddenly my professional headshot appeared alongside the title Dr. Emma Rodriguez, founder and CEO Little Minds Academy. The silence that followed was so profound that I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in Mom's living room and the distant sound of neighborhood children playing outside. For several long seconds, nobody moved or spoke as they stared at the screen displaying information that challenged everything they thought they knew about their daughter's sister and family member. The grandfather clock in Mom's living room seemed to tick louder in the absolute silence that followed Kelly's revelation. Jessica's fork clattered against her plate as her hand flew to cover her mouth, her eyes wide with disbelief as she stared at my professional photograph displayed on the presentation screen. David's mouth hung open slightly, his phone still clutched in his hand from when he'd been researching the organization that had just been revealed as my creation. Mom's face cycled through confusion, shock, and something approaching awe as she looked back and forth between the screen and me, as if trying to reconcile the polished professional image with her daughter sitting at the dining room table. Dad was the first to break the silence, his voice hoarse with bewilderment. "Emma, this is you? You're the founder of this organization." He gestured weakly toward the presentation screen, where my credentials were displayed alongside photos of Little Minds Academy locations across 3 states. The disbelief in his voice was tinged with something I'd never heard before when he spoke about my accomplishments. Genuine respect mixed with profound confusion about how he'd so completely misunderstood his own daughter's life. "That's impossible," Michael said, shaking his head as if the information could be dismissed through sheer denial. "Emma works at a daycare center. She drives that old Honda and lives in a studio apartment. There's no way she could be running a multi-million-dollar educational company." His words tumbled out in a rush, as if speaking them quickly enough could make the evidence on the screen disappear and restore the familiar family dynamics he understood. James Harrison maintained his professional composure as he watched my family process this earth-shaking revelation. "I can understand your surprise," he said gently. "Dr. Rodriguez has been deliberately private about her professional achievements, but her work has had a profound impact on thousands of families across the Southwest. The Little Minds Academy approach to early childhood development has been featured in Educational Leadership magazine, and Dr. Rodriguez herself was recently named Innovator of the Year by the National Association of Early Childhood Educators." Kelly advanced to the next slide, which displayed a timeline of Little Minds Academy's growth over the past 4 years. The progression from a single location in Tempe to a network of 8 facilities serving over 2,000 children was laid out in clear, undeniable detail. Revenue figures, staff numbers, and outcome statistics painted a picture of sustained success that contradicted everything my family had assumed about my professional capabilities. Ashley looked at the timeline with growing amazement. 4 years ago, she said slowly, that's when you started working at the daycare center. We thought you were struggling to find direction after Grandma died. Her voice carried a note of hurt that suggested she was beginning to understand how completely I'd misled them about my circumstances. You let us believe you were barely getting by while you were building all of this? The pain in her question made my chest tight. I'd known this moment would be difficult, but I hadn't fully anticipated how my deception would feel like a betrayal to people who genuinely cared about me. I didn't set out to mislead anyone, I said carefully, speaking for the first time since James had begun his presentation. When I started working with Dr. Chen at Phoenix Children's Hospital, I had no idea it would lead to anything like this. I kept quiet because I wanted to focus on the work without having to justify or explain my choices. Jessica's expression shifted from shock to something approaching hurt, as she processed the implications of what she was learning. The baby shower yesterday, she said, her voice barely
above a whisper. When everyone was talking about finding qualified childcare and educational programs, you just sat there listening to us worry about things you're literally an expert in. The realization that I'd allowed them to discuss their concerns about child development while possessing knowledge that could have addressed all their questions seemed to sting more than my financial deception. You let Dad suggest that you needed CPR training, she continued, her voice growing stronger with a mixture of hurt and indignation. You sat there while we worried about whether you were responsible enough to babysit, when you're actually qualified to design entire educational programs. The irony wasn't lost on any of us that less than 24 hours earlier, they'd questioned my competence to spend time alone with their future child. James seemed to sense the emotional complexity of the family dynamics unfolding and decided to provide some breathing room by focusing on the practical aspects of why he was there. Dr. Rodriguez has established a scholarship fund that will provide full educational support for your child from birth through high school, he explained, advancing to a slide that detailed the comprehensive program they'd designed. This includes access to our early development assessments, individualized learning plans, and ongoing support to ensure your child reaches their full potential. The scholarship details were impressive even by the standards of the educational world I'd inhabited for years. The fund would cover not just tuition at any Little Minds Academy location, but also supplementary services like speech therapy, occupational therapy, and specialized tutoring if needed. Additionally, it included access to our family education programs, which taught parents how to support their children's development at home using evidence-based techniques. David found his voice as he absorbed the scope of what was being offered. This scholarship you're describing, the value of all these services, it must be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. His background in sales had given him an appreciation for the monetary value of comprehensive educational programs, and his calculation was actually conservative compared to the true cost of the individualized support we were offering. The scholarship fund has been endowed with $1.2 million, Kelly confirmed, causing another wave of stunned silence around the table. Rodriguez wanted to ensure that your family would never have to worry about accessing the best possible educational opportunities for your child, regardless of changing circumstances or unexpected needs. The figure represented more money than my parents had earned in the last decade combined, and the casual way it was mentioned emphasized just how dramatically my financial situation differed from their assumptions. Mom finally found her voice, though it trembled with emotion as she spoke. Emma, sweetheart, I don't understand any of this. How did you build something so impressive while we thought you were struggling? When did you have time to earn a doctorate? How did we miss so much of your life? Her questions revealed the depth of her confusion and the guilt she was beginning to feel about how completely she'd misjudged her own daughter's capabilities and achievements. The timeline she was trying to reconstruct would have seemed impossible if she'd known the full extent of my schedule over the past 6 years. While working at the daycare center during the day, I'd been attending graduate school in the evenings and weekends, conducting research on early childhood development, and slowly building the network of relationships that would eventually become Little Minds Academy.
The doctoral degree she'd just learned about had been earned through a combination of online coursework, intensive summer residencies, and a dissertation based on the innovative teaching methods I was developing in real-world settings. The doctorate came from ASU's accelerated program for working professionals, I explained, knowing that she needed concrete details to make sense of what seemed impossible. Chen connected me with professors who were interested in my practical work with children, and they helped me design a research program that built on what I was already doing. The dissertation was about individualized learning approaches for children with developmental challenges. Dad was still staring at the presentation screen, where images of our specialized learning environments displayed the kind of sophisticated educational technology that most schools couldn't afford. "These facilities," he said slowly, "you designed all of this. You own these buildings." His questions revealed how difficult it was for him to reconcile the successful professional shown in the presentation with the daughter he'd been offering basic life advice to just hours earlier. "The Tempe location is owned outright," I confirmed, watching his expression change as he processed the financial implications of commercial real estate ownership. "The other locations are a combination of owned and leased properties, depending on the local market conditions and our expansion strategy." The casual way I discussed business decisions involving millions of dollars seemed to drive home the reality of my success more effectively than any amount of documentation could have. Michael was examining the tablet Kelly had brought, scrolling through testimonials from parents whose children had transformed under our care. "Listen to this," he said, his voice filled with amazement. "Dr. Rodriguez identified learning challenges that 3 other specialists had missed. Her individualized program helped our son go from nonverbal to speaking in complete sentences within 8 months." He looked up at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Genuine admiration mixed with confusion about how he'd so completely misunderstood my capabilities. Ashley was reading over his shoulder, her own amazement growing as she absorbed story after story of children who'd thrived under programs I'd designed. "Emma, these families are writing about you like you performed miracles. This little girl with autism learned to read using methods you developed. This boy with ADHD became a confident student after working with your team." Her voice carried wonder and a growing understanding of the significance of the work I'd been doing while they thought I was simply playing with children at a daycare center. James recognized that the family needed time to process what they were learning, but he also wanted to complete the presentation that would give them a full picture of my professional achievements. "Dr. Rodriguez has been invited to speak at the International Conference on Early Childhood Development next month," he continued, advancing to a slide that showed my upcoming speaking engagements and media appearances. "Her research on individualized learning approaches is being implemented in schools across 15 states. The speaking engagements listed on the screen represented the culmination of years of research and practical application that had positioned me as a recognized expert in my field. The conferences weren't small local gatherings, but major international events where the world's leading educators shared breakthrough research and innovative practices. My acceptance as a keynote speaker at several of these events indicated a level of professional recognition that few people achieved in an entire career, let alone before age 30. Kelly added context that helped explain the significance of these achievements. "Dr. Rodriguez is the youngest person ever to receive the National Innovation Award from the Early Childhood Education Foundation," she said, displaying a photo of me accepting the award at a ceremony in Washington, D.C. Her work has been cited in over 40 academic papers, and she's currently serving on the advisory board for the Department of Education's Early Learning Initiative. The advisory board appointment was particularly meaningful because it meant that federal education policy was being influenced by research and methods I'd developed. Children across the country would benefit from approaches I'd pioneered in our small Tempe facility, scaled up and implemented through government programs designed to support early childhood development in underserved communities. Jessica had been quietly absorbing everything she was learning, but now she spoke with a mixture of awe and hurt in her voice. "Yesterday, when Margaret was talking about the importance of early education and quality child care, you could have contributed so much to that conversation. Instead, you let her pontificate about concepts you literally invented." The realization that I'd remained silent while listening to oversimplified discussions of my own area of expertise seemed to crystallize the complex emotions she was experiencing. When Cynthia was bragging about her daughter's exclusive preschool, Jessica continued, "You knew exactly how their program compared to evidence-based best practices, but you said nothing.
You let us all sound foolish discussing things we barely understood while you had expertise we desperately needed. Her words revealed how my deception had not only hidden my success, but had also deprived them of knowledge that could have benefited their own children and parenting decisions. The hurt in her voice made me realize that my secrecy had consequences beyond my own life. By hiding my expertise, I'd allowed my family to make decisions about education and child development without access to information that could have significantly improved outcomes for their children. The protective instinct that had led me to keep my achievements private had inadvertently deprived the people I loved of resources that could have helped them. There's more, James said gently, sensing that the family was beginning to process their emotions about my deception. Dr. Rodriguez has also established a family education fund that provides resources for parents and extended family members who want to learn about supporting child development. He advanced to a slide detailing programs designed specifically for grandparents, siblings, and other relatives who played important roles in children's lives. The family education programs I developed recognized that children's learning happened not just in formal educational settings but in every interaction with caring adults. Grandparents who understood how to encourage language development during everyday conversations could have as much impact as professional therapists. Siblings who knew how to engage in educational play could reinforce lessons learned in school and help children develop confidence and social skills. Dad's expression had shifted from shock to something approaching regret as he began to understand the full scope of what he'd missed about my life and capabilities. Emma, when you were caring for Grandma, and we thought you were throwing away your future, you were actually preparing for this work. His question revealed that he was beginning to see connections between past events and my current success that had been invisible to him before. Grandma taught me more about child development than any textbook could have, I replied, my voice carrying the emotion I always felt when thinking about the woman who'd raised me. She showed me how to see potential in people that others had given up on, how to be patient with different learning styles, and how to believe in someone's capacity to grow even when progress seemed impossible. The lessons I'd learned while caring for her during her illness had become fundamental principles in my approach to working with children who faced various challenges. Mom's eyes filled with tears as she began to understand how profoundly she'd misunderstood my life choices and the meaning behind decisions she'd seen as failures. You honored her memory by building all of this, she said softly. While we worried that caring for her had derailed your future, you were actually learning the foundation for everything you'd become. Her realization that my apparent sacrifice had actually been the source of my greatest success seemed to shift her entire perspective on the past 6 years. The presentation was nearing its conclusion, but James had saved one final surprise that would complete the transformation of how my family understood my place in their lives and in the world of early childhood education. Dr. Rodriguez asked me to share one more piece of information with you, he said, his smile indicating that the final revelation would be particularly meaningful. Kelly activated the last slide, which displayed a news article from that morning's Arizona Republic with the headline "Local Educator Named to Time Magazine's 40 Under 40 List." My photograph accompanied the article, along with a description of Little Minds Academy's impact on early childhood education and my role in developing innovative approaches that were being adopted nationally. The Time magazine recognition represented more than just another professional accolade. It was acknowledgement from one of the country's most respected publications that my work was having significant cultural impact. The 40 Under 40 list included entrepreneurs, scientists, artists, and leaders who were reshaping their industries and influencing society in meaningful ways. Being included alongside such accomplished individuals validated that my contributions to education were being recognized at the highest levels of American society. The article mentions that Dr. Rodriguez has declined most media interviews to focus on her work, James noted, but she's agreed to appear on the Today Show next week to discuss her research on individualized learning approaches. The national television appearance would mark my first major media engagement, a decision I'd made partly because I was finally ready to step out of the shadows and partly because I wanted my family to see me as the accomplished professional I'd become. David was scrolling through the Time magazine article on his phone, reading aloud passages that described my innovations in early childhood education. Rodriguez's approaches have shown remarkable success with children who struggle in traditional educational settings, often achieving learning gains that exceed normal developmental expectations. He looked up at me with an expression of amazement mixed with respect. Emma, this article is describing you as one of the most innovative educators in the country.
The weight of everything they were learning seemed to settle over the room like a transformation that would permanently change how we related to each other as a family. The daughter, sister, and family member they'd seen as struggling and directionless had been revealed as someone whose professional achievements exceeded anything they'd imagined possible. The implications of this revelation would take time to fully process, but I could already see the beginning of a fundamental shift in how they understood my capabilities and my place in their lives. Ashley broke the contemplative silence that had fallen over the table. "Emma, the wooden toy you gave Jessica yesterday, that wasn't just a random gift, was it?" Her question revealed that she was beginning to see past events in a new light, recognizing that what had seemed like simple or inadequate choices might have actually been informed by expertise they hadn't understood. "It's a prototype from our latest cognitive development line," I confirmed, watching Jessica's expression change as she realized the significance of what she'd casually dismissed as a modest present. "The design is based on research about spatial reasoning development in infants, and it's being tested in our academies before we make it available to other programs." The toy that had seemed underwhelming compared to expensive strollers and monitor systems was actually a cutting-edge educational tool, designed by leading experts in child development. Jessica's hand moved to her belly as she absorbed this information. "You chose that gift specifically for my baby's developmental needs," she said, her voice filled with wonder and a growing understanding of how different my perspective was from what she'd assumed. "While everyone else was buying things that looked impressive, you were thinking about what would actually benefit my child's cognitive growth." The realization seemed to crystallize something important for her about the difference between expensive purchases and meaningful support. The families who spent thousands on elaborate nursery equipment weren't necessarily providing better developmental support than someone who understood which simple tools could have the greatest impact on a child's learning trajectory. Mom stood up from the table and walked around to where I was sitting, her eyes still bright with tears as she processed everything she'd learned about my hidden life. "Emma, honey, I owe you such an enormous apology. We've been treating you like someone who needed our guidance and protection when you were actually the most accomplished person in this room." Her words carried genuine remorse mixed with pride as she began to see me as the successful professional I'd worked so hard to become. "I need to ask you something," Dad said, his voice carrying more seriousness than I'd heard from him in years. "Why didn't you trust us enough to share what you were building? Did you think we wouldn't be supportive?" His question cut to the heart of the family dynamics that had led to my secrecy, and I could see that my answer would be important for how we moved forward from this revelation. The question deserved an honest response, even if it meant acknowledging some painful truths about how our family had functioned over the years. "I didn't keep it secret because I thought you'd be unsupportive," I said carefully. "I kept it secret because I was afraid you'd try to manage my choices or offer advice that would interfere with what I was trying to build. You all have strong opinions about success and career paths, and I needed space to figure out my own direction without having to justify every decision." Michael nodded slowly, seeming to understand the family dynamics I was describing. "You knew we'd have opinions about your business plan, your financial decisions, your choice to work for free while building your reputation." His acknowledgement suggested that he recognized how the family's tendency to offer unsolicited advice might have felt overwhelming when I was trying to navigate uncertain territory. "And if I'd failed," I continued, "I didn't want to deal with 'I told you so' conversations or suggestions about what I should have done differently." The secrecy gave me freedom to take risks and make mistakes without having to defend my choices to people who might not understand why I was willing to sacrifice immediate security for long-term goals. Ashley's expression showed that she was beginning to understand the emotional logic behind my deception. "You protected yourself from our judgment while you were building something that required complete focus and commitment," she said thoughtfully. "But now that you've succeeded beyond what any of us could have imagined, you're ready to share it with us." The family meeting was drawing to a natural conclusion, but I could sense that the conversations we'd started would continue for months as everyone processed what they'd learned and what it meant for how we related to each other going forward. James and Kelly began packing up their presentation materials, having successfully completed the most delicate family revelation I'd ever orchestrated. "There's one more thing," I said, as everyone prepared to process privately what they'd experienced together. "The Little Minds Academy mobile unit outside isn't just for presentations, it's a fully equipped learning laboratory that we use for community outreach. If you'd like, I can show you some of the tools and techniques we use to assess and support children's development." The offer was my way of inviting them into my professional world in a hands-on way that would help them understand what I actually did for a living. Jessica was the first to respond enthusiastically. I would love to see how these programs actually work, she said, her earlier hurt beginning to transform into curiosity and excitement about learning from her sister's expertise. Especially if this is what my child will have access to as they grow up. Her eagerness to understand my work suggested that the revelation about my professional success was beginning to outweigh her feelings about having been deceived. As we prepared to move outside to explore the mobile unit, Dad stopped me with a hand on my shoulder. Emma, I need you to know that I'm proud of what you've accomplished, but I'm even more proud of who you've become, he said, his voice carrying more emotion than I'd heard from him since Grandma's funeral. The fact that you built something this meaningful while maintaining humility and focus on helping others, that tells me more about your character than any professional achievement could. His words meant more to me than any award or recognition I'd received because they acknowledged not just my success but the values that had guided my work. The little girl who'd been written off as unfocused and directionless had grown into someone whose life's work was helping other underestimated children reach their full potential. 6 months later, I stood in the renovated conference room at Little Minds Academy headquarters, looking out at my family gathered around the table where we held our monthly board meetings. Jessica sat with 3-month-old Sophia sleeping peacefully in her arms, while David took notes about the scholarship program that would support their daughter's development from infancy through college. Mom and Dad had become regular volunteers in our family education programs, using their experience as grandparents to help other families navigate the challenges of supporting children's learning at home. Michael had left his insurance job to become Little Minds Academy's Director of Family Services, applying his sales skills to help parents understand and access the educational resources their children needed. Ashley had returned to school to earn her master's degree in early childhood education, inspired by seeing how much impact the right interventions could have on children's lives. The baby shower incident had become family legend, a story we told about the importance of not making assumptions about people's capabilities or potential. Sophia would grow up, knowing that her Aunt Emma had once been dismissed as not aunt material, by people who didn't understand that expertise often develops quietly, in unexpected places among individuals who are more focused on doing meaningful work than on receiving recognition for their efforts. As I watched my family embrace their new understanding of my life and work, I realized that the most powerful transformations often happen not through dramatic confrontations, but through patient demonstration of capabilities that others had never imagined. The woman they'd underestimated had not only proven them wrong, but had created opportunities for them to become part of something larger than any of us had dreamed possible. The real surprise hadn't been my professional success or financial achievements. The real surprise had been discovering that a family's capacity to grow, learn, and support each other could expand just as dramatically as any individual's potential when given the right conditions and enough time to develop. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my corner office at Little Minds Academy headquarters, casting long shadows across the mahogany desk where I'd just finished reviewing expansion proposals for our programs in Texas and Colorado. 2 years had passed since that transformative Sunday afternoon, when my family's understanding of my life had been completely rewritten, and the changes that followed continued to ripple through all our relationships in ways both subtle and profound. A soft knock on my office door interrupted my thoughts, and Maya Thompson entered carrying a steaming cup of coffee and the morning's newspaper. "Have you seen today's Arizona Republic?" she asked, her smile indicating good news, as she placed the paper on my desk with the front page facing up. The headline read, "Local Education Pioneer Receives Presidential Recognition for Innovation in Child Development," accompanied by a photograph of me shaking hands with the Secretary of Education at a White House ceremony the previous week. The Presidential Award for Excellence in Education Innovation represented the culmination of everything I'd worked toward since those early days of quietly developing new approaches to helping children learn. The recognition wasn't just personal validation, but acknowledgement that the methods we'd pioneered at Little Minds Academy were now being implemented in schools across 47 states, transforming how educators understood and supported children with diverse learning needs. The article mentions that you're the youngest recipient in the award's 30-year history, Maya noted, settling into the leather chair across from my desk. It also includes that wonderful quote from Dr. Chen about how you've revolutionized early intervention approaches for children with developmental challenges. The mention of my mentor brought back memories of that first conversation in the hospital family lounge, when she'd recognized potential in me that I hadn't even known existed. My phone buzzed with a text from Jessica, whose daughter Sophia was now walking and beginning to demonstrate the early language skills that our assessment tools had predicted based on her developmental patterns during infancy. Saw the newspaper. Sophia's first word this morning was books. I think your influence is already showing. Can't wait for family dinner tonight to celebrate your latest achievement. The message carried warmth and pride that would have been unimaginable during those years, when my family saw me as the struggling member who needed their concern, rather than their admiration. The family dinners that had once been exercises in polite endurance had transformed into genuine celebrations of shared accomplishments and mutual support. Mom had become one of our most effective advocates in the community, using her network of friends and former colleagues to spread awareness about early childhood development resources. Dad had surprised everyone by developing a passion for educational policy, attending school board meetings, and advocating for programs that supported children with learning differences. Michael's transition from insurance sales to family services coordinator at Little Minds Academy had proven to be one of the most successful career changes in our family's history. His natural ability to connect with people, combined with his growing understanding of child development principles, made him extraordinarily effective at helping families navigate complex educational decisions. Parents who felt overwhelmed by their children's needs found comfort in his approachable manner and practical guidance. Ashley had completed her master's degree in early childhood education the previous spring, writing her thesis on family engagement strategies that built on research we'd conducted at the academy. Her work had been so impressive that she'd been invited to present her findings at the National Association for the
Education of Young Children's annual conference, establishing her own reputation as an emerging expert in the field. The transformation of my family from concerned observers of my presumed struggles to active participants in meaningful work had been one of the most rewarding aspects of finally revealing my professional identity. They hadn't just accepted my success, they'd found ways to contribute to the mission that had driven my career from its earliest days. A calendar notification reminded me that I had a video conference in 15 minutes with the production team for the documentary film that was being made about innovative approaches to early childhood education. The filmmaker, an Academy Award winner named Catherine Williams, had approached me 6 months earlier about featuring Little Minds Academy in a project that would showcase how creative educators were addressing the learning needs of children who struggled in traditional settings. The documentary, tentatively titled Every Child's Potential, would follow several families whose children had thrived after receiving individualized educational support. Sophia's development would be featured as an example of how early intervention and family education could optimize outcomes even for children who didn't show obvious signs of learning challenges. Jessica had enthusiastically agreed to participate, seeing the film as an opportunity to help other families understand the importance of paying attention to each child's unique developmental pattern. As I prepared for the video call, I reflected on how different my relationship with media attention had become since those early years when I'd deliberately avoided recognition to focus on building my programs. The shift hadn't happened overnight, but gradually I'd realized that sharing knowledge about effective educational approaches was just as important as developing them. Children in communities across the country could benefit from understanding that had been developed in our small Tempe facility, but only if that knowledge reached the educators and families who needed it. The documentary team joined the call from their editing studio in Los Angeles, and Catherine Williams' enthusiasm for the project was immediately evident. Dr. Rodriguez, the footage we've captured at your academies has been extraordinary, she said, her excitement carrying clearly through the video connection. The way your staff connects with children who've been struggling elsewhere, the transformation we've witnessed in just the few months we've been filming, it's genuinely moving. The film would include scenes of children making breakthrough connections, parents learning to support their children's development at home, and educators from other programs observing our methods to implement similar approaches in their own schools. One particularly powerful sequence showed a 7-year-old boy with autism learning to communicate through a combination of visual supports and music therapy that we'd developed specifically for his needs. The segment featuring your family has been especially compelling, Catherine continued. Jessica's insights about discovering her sister's work, combined with footage of Sophia benefiting from early assessment and family guidance, really illustrates how this knowledge can impact entire families across generations. The personal story of my family's transformation provided an emotional foundation for the more technical aspects of educational innovation featured throughout the film. Maya had been monitoring social media responses to recent articles about my work, and she shared some of the feedback during a brief break in the documentary discussion. The response to the presidential award coverage has been incredible, she reported. We're getting messages from educators in rural communities asking about training opportunities, and several state education departments have reached out about implementing our assessment tools more broadly. The requests for training and consultation represented both an opportunity and a challenge as we considered how to expand our impact without compromising the quality that had made our programs successful. We developed a careful approach to growth that prioritized thorough preparation of educators over rapid expansion, ensuring that children would receive consistently excellent support regardless of which location they attended. Catherine returned to our video call with questions about the broader implications of our educational philosophy. Dr. Rodriguez, what would you say to parents who are concerned that their children might not be reaching developmental milestones at the same pace as their peers? Her question addressed one of the most common sources of anxiety among families we worked with, and my response would be featured prominently in the documentary. Every child develops according to their own timeline, I replied, drawing on thousands of conversations with worried parents over the years. Our job isn't to force children to meet arbitrary expectations, but to understand each child's unique strengths and challenges so we can provide the right support at the right time. Some children need more time to develop language skills, but show exceptional spatial reasoning abilities. Others might struggle with traditional academic tasks, but demonstrate remarkable emotional intelligence and social awareness. The documentary would include examples of children whose apparent delays had actually been indicators of different learning styles that, when properly supported, led to exceptional achievements. A little girl who'd been considered behind in reading had developed into a gifted storyteller when provided with visual and auditory learning tools that matched her processing preferences. A boy whose attention challenges had frustrated his teachers had become a confident problem solver when given opportunities to learn through movement and hands-on exploration. These success stories weren't miraculous transformations but rather natural outcomes when children received educational support that recognized and built on their individual strengths. The tragedy wasn't that some children learned differently, but that so many educational systems expected all children to learn in the same way, and labeled those who couldn't conform as problems to be fixed rather than individuals to be understood. After concluding the documentary call, I walked down the hallway to observe one of our new teacher training sessions, where educators from schools across Arizona were learning to implement our assessment and intervention techniques. The enthusiasm in the room was infectious as experienced teachers discovered new ways to reach children who'd been struggling in their classrooms. Dr. Sarah Chen was leading the session, sharing insights about neuroplasticity and early intervention that had become foundational to our approach. The developing brain is remarkably adaptable, she explained to the group of 20 educators gathered around tables covered with assessment materials and learning tools. When we provide appropriate support during critical periods, we can literally help children's brains develop new pathways for processing information. The teachers were practicing with assessment tools we developed to identify children's learning preferences and potential challenges before problems became entrenched patterns of failure. Early identification allowed for gentle interventions that supported children's natural development rather than requiring intensive remediation later in their academic careers. One of the participating teachers, a woman named Maria Santos, who worked in a Title school serving low-income families, raised her hand with a question that reflected the reality many educators faced. Dr. Chen, these approaches are clearly effective, but how can we implement them in schools with limited resources and large class sizes? Her concern was valid and represented one of the ongoing challenges in making high-quality educational support accessible to all children who needed it. That's exactly why we've developed the family education component of our programs. Dr. Chen replied, gesturing toward materials that taught parents and caregivers how to support their children's development at home. Many of the most effective interventions don't require expensive equipment or specialized facilities. They require understanding each child's needs and providing consistent, appropriate support in whatever environment the child spends their time. The family education programs had become one of our most successful innovations, recognizing that children's learning happened primarily outside school settings and that parents were their children's first and most important teachers. Simple changes in how families approached homework, playtime, and daily conversations could have profound impacts on children's academic and social development. As the training session concluded, several teachers approached me with questions about bringing our programs to their schools.
Their enthusiasm reminded me of my own excitement during those early days when I'd first begun to understand how much difference the right educational support could make in children's lives. Each teacher who learned these approaches would potentially impact hundreds of children over the course of their career, multiplying the reach of innovations that had started in our small Tempin facility. The afternoon brought a visit from a delegation of educators from Finland, who were studying American innovations in early childhood education to inform policy development in their own country. Finland's education system was internationally recognized for its excellence, and their interest in our work represented validation from some of the world's leading educational thinkers. The Finnish educators were particularly interested in our approach to supporting children with learning differences, noting that their own system, while highly effective for most students, sometimes struggled to accommodate children whose needs fell outside typical patterns. Our individualized assessment and intervention methods offered strategies they could adapt for implementation within their national education framework. In Finland, we pride ourselves on educational equity, explained Dr. Annika Virtanen, the delegation's leader and a professor at the University of Helsinki. But we've learned that providing the same education to all children doesn't necessarily result in equitable outcomes. Your work demonstrates how truly equitable education requires understanding and responding to each child's individual needs. The international recognition of our approaches reinforced my belief that the principles we developed had relevance far beyond the specific communities we served directly. Children everywhere deserved educational support that recognized their unique strengths and provided appropriate challenges and assistance, regardless of their cultural background or the educational system they attended. As evening approached, I prepared to leave the office for the family dinner Jessica had mentioned in her morning text. These gatherings had become monthly traditions, where we celebrated professional achievements, shared challenges we were facing, and maintained the close connections that had been strengthened rather than damaged by the revelation of my hidden career. The drive to my parents' house took me past the original daycare center where I'd worked during those formative years, when I was developing my understanding of child development. The building looked smaller than I remembered, but I felt deep gratitude for the experiences that had provided the foundation for everything that followed. Working directly with children every day had taught me lessons that no graduate program could have provided about the complexity and individuality of human learning. Mom had prepared a feast in honor of the Presidential Award, and the dining room table was set with her finest china and decorations that celebrated educational achievement. Sophia toddled around the room with the confident mobility of a healthy 15-month-old, occasionally stopping to examine books and toys that had been selected specifically to support her developing interests in language and exploration. "Emma, we need to discuss the scholarship fund," Dad said as we gathered around the table. "Sophia's not going to need all that educational support money you set aside, given that she's already demonstrating advanced development. We've been thinking that maybe some of those resources could benefit other children who need them more." His suggestion reflected the family's growing understanding of educational equity and their desire to contribute to meaningful solutions. The conversation that followed demonstrated how completely my family's perspective on education and child development had evolved since that baby shower, where they dismissed me as not aunt material. They discussed learning differences with sophistication, asked informed questions about research findings, and proposed ideas for expanding access to high-quality educational support that showed genuine insight into the challenges facing children and families in our community. Jessica had become particularly passionate about supporting families who couldn't afford private educational services, using her marketing skills to develop communication strategies that help parents understand and access resources available through public programs. "There are so many families who don't know that their children's struggles might be addressed through early intervention," she said during dinner. "We need better ways to reach parents before problems become entrenched." Her observation was accurate and reflected one of the ongoing challenges in the field of early childhood education. Many families didn't recognize that their children's difficulties with attention, language development, or social interaction might be addressed through specialized support, particularly if those families lacked connections to educational professionals who could provide guidance. Ashley had been working on research that addressed exactly this issue, studying how community organizations could partner with schools to identify children who might benefit from additional support. "We're finding that pediatricians and child care providers are often the first people to notice when children aren't developing typically," she reported. Training these professionals to recognize potential concerns and make appropriate referrals could help us reach families much earlier in their children's development. The evening concluded with Sophia demonstrating her latest developmental achievements, pointing to pictures in books and attempting to repeat words that her parents read aloud. The sophisticated assessment tools we developed suggested that she was progressing beautifully across all domains of development, but more importantly, she seemed to be developing the curiosity and confidence that would serve her well throughout her educational journey. As I drove home to my downtown Phoenix condominium, where I'd moved after finally feeling ready to live in accommodations that reflected my actual financial circumstances, I reflected on the unexpected journey that had brought me from that young woman caring for her dying grandmother to someone whose work was influencing educational policy at national levels. The woman my family had once seen as directionless and struggling had discovered that her true calling lay in helping other underestimated individuals reach their potential. The dismissive comments about being not aunt material had motivated me to become not just a loving aunt, but someone whose professional expertise would benefit not only Sophia, but thousands of other children whose families needed guidance about supporting optimal development. The real transformation hadn't been my professional success or financial achievements, but rather the evolution of my family from people who worried about my capabilities to partners in meaningful work that would impact generations of children. They'd learned to see potential where they'd once seen problems, and their own growth had become as rewarding as any recognition my career had brought. 6 months later, I stood on the stage of the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C., delivering the keynote address at the National Education Summit to an audience of 3,000 educators, policymakers, and advocates. The presentation focused on the principle that had guided my work from its earliest days: every child possesses unique strengths and potential that can be developed through appropriate support and understanding. Education is not about forcing all children to fit the same mold, I told the audience, speaking from years of experience working with children whose needs had been overlooked or misunderstood by traditional approaches. Education is about understanding each child's individual gifts and challenges, then providing the support they need to thrive according to their own developmental timeline. The audience responded enthusiastically to examples of children whose lives had been transformed not through dramatic interventions, but through careful attention to their individual needs and patient support of their natural development. These success stories demonstrated that educational equity wasn't about providing identical services to all children, but about ensuring that every child received appropriate support for their unique circumstances. As I concluded my presentation, I thought about Sophia, now 2 years old and demonstrating the kind of confident curiosity that predicted lifelong learning success. She would grow up in a family that understood how to support her development, surrounded by adults who recognized that every child's potential could be nurtured through understanding, patience, and appropriate educational support. The journey from being dismissed as not aunt material to receiving recognition as a national leader in education had taught me that the most powerful transformations often happen quietly, through consistent work focused on helping others rather than seeking personal recognition. The family who had once questioned my competence now understood that expertise develops in unexpected places, among individuals who are more interested in making a difference than in proving their worth to others. The real measure of success wasn't the awards or media attention, but the knowledge that children across the country were receiving better educational support because of methods developed in our small Phoenix facility. Every child who learned to read through approaches that honored their individual learning style, every family that received guidance about supporting their child's development, every educator who learned to see potential rather than problems, represented the true impact of work that had begun with a simple desire to help children reach their full potential. As I left the Kennedy Center that evening, walking past monuments to leaders who had transformed American society through their commitment to justice and human development, I felt profound gratitude for the journey that had brought me from family disappointment to national recognition. The woman they'd once seen as not aunt material had become someone whose life's work was ensuring that no child would be written off as lacking potential simply because their needs weren't immediately understood. The most satisfying aspect of my success wasn't personal achievement, but the knowledge that Sophia and countless other children would grow up in a world where educational support was becoming more individualized, more responsive to diverse needs, and more focused on helping every child discover and develop their unique gifts. The family dinner conversations that had once focused on my presumed limitations now centered on expanding opportunities for children whose potential might otherwise remain hidden. The transformation was complete, but the work of helping underestimated individuals reach their potential would continue for as long as there were children who needed someone to believe in their capacity to learn, grow, and contribute to the world in their own remarkable ways. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.